Well, good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many folks bright-eyed and bushy-tailed after what I heard was a pretty boot-scootin' booty. And I'm sorry, I missed the inflatables. JP, shockingly, you were in one. Well, we're looking forward to a robust discussion with you today, and I think we're going to be building on some conversations that I've had with many of you in the halls. A good conference means a lot of hall conversations. There's a lot going on right now in the world of science and in the world of Washington, and we're here to unpack that a little bit. We want to really take this hour to talk through let's really unpack what the federal government and federal funding's role is in CF science. What does it mean? Why is it important? Why does it matter? And how do we work with the federal agencies that we've been hearing so much about in the news? If I can give you one word of what federal agencies like NIH and FDA mean for CF science, is integral. It's extremely important. The agencies themselves, the funding, the research, the drug reviews and approvals, the training of clinical researchers, of basic researchers, all integral to our efforts to find a cure and make sure everyone with CF has therapies that work for them. But we want to make sure you understand what that looks like and really unpack it. And we have an awesome panel who really lives and breathes this in every form around CF. I will sort of, again, cap off the intro here to what we're going to be talking about to say that it is easy to say that the story of cystic fibrosis and where we are today would not exist without the NIH and the FDA as critical partners in our work, both of where we are today, where we've gotten to, and also, very importantly, where we're going. So we want to, again, unpack that a little bit for you, and we have an awesome panel to do so. So thanks, ladies. I'm looking forward to our discussion. And Catherine, we're going to start with you. I think we really need to start at the beginning. As I said, the foundation, and let's start with the NIH, sort of the basic research, we'll sort of build from there. We have a long history of working together and complementing each other's research work. And so I hope you could give us, just to kick us off, a broad overview of that research and explain why it's been critical to our progress for developing treatments for CF.
Perfect. Thanks, Mary. And thanks to all of you for being here today and really allowing us to kind of shed some light on how our interactions have really been really important with the NIH and the FDA over the years. So I think to kind of step back, go big picture, the NIH, as Mary said, is absolutely crucial to the work that we do. The NIH is actually the largest funder of research in the world as far as biomedical and behavioral health research. So that's kind of a big thing. They really support the ecosystem that supports most of the research that is done around the world and really facilitates a lot of the work around the globe. For those of you who are not aware, the National Institutes of Health are comprised of 27 institutes and centers. And this kind of breaks down the different parts of kind of how research is funded, how it's viewed, and really it's set up in a lot of times body system types of areas, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. It's with the foundation, with the types of work that we do, we integrate with many of those different institutes, and so there's a lot of kind of back and forth that we have to do with the NIH on a regular basis to make sure we understand what research they're funding, where their priorities are, what research we're funding, and how they complement each other. It really is, kind of both of us together make us really strong and are able to support the work that we think is most critical to move the field forward. I think one thing that's probably very important to highlight, and I've definitely gotten this question many, many times, is we do not receive funds, from the NIH. We also do not inform the funding that the NIH gives out. So we do work as two separate entities, but again, very complementary to each other. And we have great interactions with our partners at the NIH. As I was mentioning, there are multiple different institutes that we work with. We work with the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, which has a CF research program in there. Obviously, a lot of lung research in there. The National Institutes for Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, NIDDK, which really funds a lot of our larger CF research centers, supports a lot of work into diabetes. As we are hearing, that's a major complication in CF, and so we want to make sure that that work goes on. as well as infectious diseases. So I think, as you can kind of see, we work with a number of groups because CF hits multiple parts of the body. I think it's really important. Another thing that I think is just important and may get downplayed, we'll talk a little bit more about kind of grant funding, what that means. But the NIH does even more than just fund grants. The NIH funds infrastructure and resources that are also important for moving the research field forward. A couple of things, just small examples that I think are really important that many of us research-wise use, and some of you as well, is the website PubMed. It is a resource for sharing academic research that is published in journals. The National Institutes of Health actually runs the website where researchers from around the world find out the latest and greatest science. It's critical. It's not a grant. And the clinicaltrials.gov is another area where, again, these clinical trials that we are supporting, industry is supporting, the NIH is supporting, are all loaded into that system so that people can find out where science is happening, where trials are, who is eligible. And so I think, it's about the research funding is extremely important and critical, but I think there's other parts to the NIH that people may be less aware of that are also integral to really how we're able to do our job successfully.
Yeah. So Tara, as we heard, you have 2 children with cystic fibrosis, and you all have participated in trial research, which is where really some of this basic science that Catherine's talking about is coming into the clinic, into people with CF. Can you just give us like a high level? We're going to hear about this journey all through our talk today, but high level of how did you start? What sort of prompted you to do that, and what it's been like?
Sure. So my name is Tara and currently live in Texas, but have to shout out our Colorado chapter because I equally have such great feelings for both. Colorado over there. So we moved right before the pandemic and have experience in both Colorado and Texas in terms of trial and care. And our son Cohen, who is now 11, when he was 2, Orkambi, the safety trial for Orkambi in the 2 to 5-year-olds, right after we had our triplets in October, Cohen became eligible for starting this trial for Orkambi. And at the time, was it like the best time to be starting a clinical trial? Did we have a lot of extra, hands to help with the girls? We had some, but we knew that when it was offered to Cohen, to do the trial, that we have now another baby, Harper, the youngest of the triplets. We have her just 2, almost 3 years behind Cohen. And knowing that we can pray so far, I can carry the load of praying, my family can carry the load of praying and fundraising, but that only gets us so far. We need the medications like Orkambi and Alyftrek and the modulators to get us the healthy part. And so when Cohen was offered to do that trial, he's only 2.5 at this point, there wasn't much input from him at that time, so we really kind of did the decision making for him and decided, okay, perhaps then Harper, in a couple years, will be able to get on Orkambi, knowing that that was the only modulator for them at the time. And so we kind of hunkered down, and it was very difficult. We had to keep Cohen literally illness-free for 28 days prior to starting and 28 days after, and then we had NICU preemie babies, so no one saw us, we didn't go anywhere, we just hunkered down at home, all in anticipation for starting this Orkambi trial. And then the great thing was when Harper was 2 years old, we got to start her on Orkambi, and so it was not lost on us, and now Cohen's 5 at that time. We could explain to him that, brother, this was you and all of the other people who did the pokes. I literally say the blood, sweat, and tears, and poop, and pee. They got it all from you, and it was because of that your sister, she doesn't understand it now, only being 2, but it's because of that she gets to take this really great med. And so as much as a 5-year-old can comprehend at that time, it's when we started really planting the seed in his mind that this is what we do. People before you did it, and we may not know their names and we can't thank them personally, but now it's our turn and you get to help your sister. And we've made amazing friends through the foundation as well, and other parents. And so we've also seen those medications come to light in their children and them doing well. So that's kind of our first entry into clinical trials. And then now they're both together doing the ALIF-TREC one now. So they're both our heroes now. So that's kind of our introduction to it.
I love that. Thank you. Okay. So Catherine, let's keep starting at the beginning. You talked about grants. It sounds like, I know we're hearing a lot about funding right now if you're paying attention to the science news, and it can be a little complicated and there are lots of steps and levels. Can you explain it a little bit more?
Perfect. So thanks, Tara, for sharing a little bit of your story. And I think, yeah, kind of backing up in order to make a lot of those advances to where people are benefiting from these drugs, it goes back to the very early basic science. And so for some of you in the room, you're well aware of what a grant is. But for those of you who aren't, I'll kind of walk you through the process of what getting a grant takes. So with the National Institutes of Health, and CFF runs a very similar process, there's typically a call for applications. These may be a blanket call, something that runs out every year. I think with the NIH, it's typically 3 cycles per year that people who have a great idea can submit a research grant to the NIH and say, I want to solve this problem, and here's how I'm proposing to do it. So they'll put together an application. Lots and lots and lots of papers go together for this, lots of time, lots of thought, and they really flesh out how they're wanting to approach the problem that they see, there's a gap in knowledge and we want to solve this. That gets submitted to the NIH, and that is then sent out for an external review, and there's thousands of these that come into the agency every single year. So those go out to external reviewers, and by external reviewers, what I mean is they're researchers that are at universities around the country who are experts in their field, and the NIH goes to them and says, we have these projects, and we would like your input on, is this a good project? Is this scientifically valid? Are they doing the right things? Are these the right people to do the job? And they're critically evaluating the science, the budget, the regulatory aspects. If they're using human subjects, are they protecting the patients that they're planning to use in their studies? So putting all of that together. And those external reviewers come together for a study section. So it's a meeting where everybody sits in a room. They have written critiques about these grants. They have scored the grants. And then now they all come together and talk about the grants. And that's actually kind of an exciting time at the foundation. It's a really exciting day for us. You learn about some amazing science. From that, the applications will be scored. They'll be percentiled or ranked. And then they kind of go back to the programmatic staff at the NIH, and there's a pay line. So if you have 100 applications that come in, an institute will set a pay line, and it may be 15% of their grants will be funded, or 10% of their grants. It's a really small number, but it's, they're very critical about the science. They want to make sure they're doing the best science and really supporting that and moving it forward. So those grants that meet the pay line will then be presented to what's called a council, which is a larger governing body. And that governing body will then kind of give their blessing and say, yes, we agree with this. This is these are the grants that should be moved forward. And then those go back to the programmatic staff and are actually issued as a grant. So when you hear about a grant, that is a long, multi-month, pretty close to a year-long process from when you have this great idea to when you're going to hear, did the reviewers and the government think that it's worthy of funding? And so for those grants that are funded, they'll be issued out. These grants are typically, if it's called an R01, it's kind of the big grant that most people want, and that's really what keeps labs running, is this continuity, kind of long-term funding that pays for their research staff, their research supplies, and really kind of moves the field forward. These grants will be issued on a yearly basis, or they're issued with a commitment over the years. Progress is reviewed on an annual basis, so you don't get to just get a really nice big check and then the government walks away and says, tell us how you did in 5 years when you come back. But it's reviewed on a regular basis. Certain grants may have additional oversight on them. And then at the end of that 5-year period, the researchers would hopefully have great advances, great science, and propose their next leg of that study to continue to move the field forward. So that's really kind of the lifeblood of academic research, is having those grants and keeping their programs funded. I think another piece to kind of add on there, and probably what many of you have seen in the news, is we were getting the question a lot about indirect costs. And so with those grants, when a grant is submitted, what they're really asking for is the direct costs to do the study. This pays for the principal investigator, who's the lead scientist on the study, any of their co-investigators, maybe statisticians, research nurses, technicians in the lab, graduate students. So it pays for their salaries for the amount that's committed to that project. And if the reviewers think that it's not appropriate for the budget, they will question that. So it is definitely lots of levels of oversight there. So if an award is funded, the amount of direct costs that are approved would be issued to the awardee. But the institution where that awardee is has negotiated with the government to have an indirect cost rate attached on top of that grant. And what the indirect costs mean is at the institution, there's facilities and administration that are necessary to just kind of keep the research ecosystem moving. They've got to have buildings, running water, electricity, very basics for doing a laboratory research. I want to make sure I'm working in a nice lab that has, all the amenities that are necessary to do the job. But it also supports your grants administrators who are working on making sure that paperwork is submitted to the agencies, it is compliant with federal laws, the regulatory pieces, having a human subjects research group that you can send your institutional review board paperwork to say, yes, this is an approved study. So those are all kind of wrapped into those indirect costs. And so it's an important part of the research that is done. It's not just an arbitrary number that people picked out of a hat and said, this is the new indirect cost rate, but it is something that's kind of carefully negotiated back and forth between the government and the institutions based on that individual institution's needs, requirements, in order to make sure that their research ecosystem operates fully. So I don't know if that kind of answers the question.
Well, I just want to add a few things. That was amazing, thank you, and definitely hit on questions I've gotten. I think the notion, I'm really glad you unpacked indirect costs because certainly that has been in the news, and it's one of those things that sounds like, why do we really need that? And I know that the level of indirect costs varies by institutions, like Harvard is in the news that we hear has really high costs. Well, Harvard has an enormous amount of research that's going on there. And I do think that's one of the things why you see different levels of costs going to different institutions, like their scale and scope of what they are doing, and also some of the resources that they have available to them. Like sometimes you'll see a higher indirect for very sophisticated technology that's behind there. Let's talk a little bit about what the foundation thinks about indirects, how we handle it, and also what we've said about it. So can you just do high level, like the difference between the foundation's indirects and federal?
Try to.
Okay, just a little bit,
just a little bit.
Because I'm watching our time.
Yeah, no, it's good. So the foundation has a set indirect cost rate. That's something that many nonprofit organizations do, and we're really kind of on par with many of our peer organizations. We kind of depend a little bit in this, and you may have some additional kind of insights onto this, depend a little bit on the general research kind of machinery is running through the NIH. That's how the institutions really operate. And a lot of the work that we're doing is kind of adding on to some of those projects. So it's kind of supplementing the research in a really focused area, sometimes maybe taking a research topic in one area, bringing it into CF. And so there may not be the need to necessarily pay for all of the additional costs on top of it. And so it's been a topic of conversation over the years, but that's really kind of been the position that we've been in and many other nonprofit organizations around the country.
Yeah, I think to put it succinctly, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and our peer organizations can have much smaller indirect costs because the NIH pays for the bulk of them. So I just want to repeat that. We can have much smaller indirect costs in our grants because the federal government pays for the bulk of the infrastructure. The other thing I want to point out on indirects, because again, it's been such a hot topic and I think will continue to be, is that we as the foundation, the notion of indirects and how much they should be has been a topic of conversation since I have had my career for 30 years, probably longer. And there's always been a conversation of should we lower them? That's a fair question. Mm-hmm. And I want to say specifically to the political issues that are happening right now, a particular concern that we had with the decision that is actually on hold now because of a court decision, but the move a month or so ago to slash indirects to 15% across the board was the suddenness of it. because all of these, as Catherine just described, this takes a long time to negotiate and to plan out for. And so a particular concern that the foundation has with the decision and has expressed publicly was the starkness and the rapidity of the implementation of a cut in indirects. It was going to happen within 3 days of the announcement. And the ability of scientists across the country working on cystic fibrosis research and many other issues to be able to absorb that and handle it was just, I would say, impossible. So the rapidity of it that it happened with was a particular concern for us. And we were very glad to see the court step in and say, this isn't possible right now. So you can read our comments on this if you're so inclined, because I know everyone loves the regulatory and policy comments page of cff.org as much as I do. But we're very open to the conversation, but let's do it methodically, let's do it thoughtfully in a way that makes sure that the science can continue rather than this rapid piece. All right, oh my gosh, we're halfway through and we haven't even gotten to translational. Okay, so Catherine, I'm gonna start with you and then we're gonna keep going back to Tara. Let's talk about how we blend over from this basic science into the FDA. Again, these are critical ecosystems that work very closely together to facilitate. We need the basic science to understand what we're looking for, but then we got to translate it. We got to get it into your kiddos. Let's talk about how that collaboration works, how the NIH and the FDA partner to develop therapeutics treatments. Can you give us a start on that bridge?
Perfect. So I think it's nice to kind of set the stage. So I like to think about research as really being from the bench to the bedside. If we're successful, that's where we really like to go. So the bench being the laboratory bench, which oftentimes starts with basic science research. And I know that term, we toss it around all the time as a basic scientist, but I think for many other people, it's not as clear what that is. But it's really the understanding of the underlying biology or just kind of foundational science of the world and of nature. And so there are things that can be very basic in nature that may not have a direct clinical impact or may not make sense on how that's going to translate into the future. And I'll come back and give an example of that in a minute. So we're talking about that very early stage research. We think about that as basic science. And then you have translational science, is where you're taking some of those basic science findings and trying to apply them to some sort of disease process, body system, something that's a little more clinically relevant. And if you're successful in those stages, you hopefully then move into clinical research. And that can be clinical research done in an academic setting, where maybe it's applying some type of an intervention, or it could be industry going on and moving development of a drug or a therapy that moves into the clinic to help benefit patients, as we see a lot of great advances in CF in those spaces. So I think kind of those three different buckets are hopefully a nice continuous thread through research. And just to kind of give an example that's probably very timely, we talk about it a lot, and is in the media on a regular basis, but shows where kind of having that early foundational science, really that's supported a lot of times by the NIH and other kind of governmental funding agencies, is the idea of CRISPR-Cas9, so gene editing technologies that are moving into the clinic now. So those original discoveries into how bacteria and viruses interact with each other and are able to protect themselves, that CRISPR-Cas9 machinery, that was discovered decades ago. This has been a long time in the literature. Most of us didn't care about it. It's, why do we really care about how these systems have evolved, although evolution is pretty cool sometimes. It wasn't until the 2010s or so, I think it was about 2011, 2012, that there were groups that figured out that you could apply these technologies to human health. You could actually go in and start using this machinery to gene edit human DNA. And so that kind of got it a big boost. So that moved it from that basic science, foundational research space into that translational space. And then now we're seeing that moving into the clinical research arena, and therapies are being developed. We're working on things for CF. There's other diseases that are benefiting from this. But I don't think anybody knew decades ago, when that research was funded by the NIH and other types of agencies, where it could go. And so if you don't have that science going on and continuing, the advances that you would have 10, 20, 30 years down the road may not be realized. And so I think it's kind of important to think about the different types of research, how they're important for informing the next level and kind of moving things forward. And so I've talked a lot about the NIH because obviously I work a lot with academic researchers. That's really where most of my interactions are. But I think the importance of the FDA is also out there. And the FDA is a constantly evolving kind of organization. As new technologies are being developed, they're having to learn as well. And I think one of the areas that's been really important over the years and where we've been able to benefit is we've had a very strong relationship with the FDA. And as things have changed, I remember back when we were talking about doing theratyping and having, the idea of not necessarily running every patient through a clinical trial to understand who could benefit from modulators, but doing that in a dish, doing that in cells. And the FDA came along for the ride, and we had people from their agency coming to workshops and participating in the dialogue, working with Mary and her team, working with many others at the foundation. And really, it was that back and forth kind of informing what we know from our side as the CF Foundation and their needs to ensure that they're reviewing and approving safe and effective drugs, that we were able to kind of inform each other and really partner to make sure that we're doing what's best for people with CF.
So Tara, when you hear all this, can you talk a little bit more about you talked about the why, but what were some of the factors that you considered when you were thinking about whether to enroll your child in a clinical trial? Did you have concerns? Did you have questions?
Yes, and now they're coming from an 11-year-old. So, like I said, Cohen, obviously age brings upon wisdom, and Cohen, he is smart, and he literally, when they called, and so now we're in the ALIFTREC trial, and we travel to Colorado for this trial. When we moved to Texas, it was very important for us that we said to our providers, we will only move if we can keep you in our back pocket. And I mean that because when you are raising children with a chronic illness, especially at the first few years of life, as you parents and grandparents can understand, you are at the doctor all the time. Your relationship with your provider becomes so much more than just a provider. Your first name basis, their family, they celebrate milestones with you. And so when we moved to Texas and then the pandemic happened, we kind of felt out of place. We are, seeing our current provider, who we also adore, via telehealth, yet it feels very foreign because we're supposed to have hands-on these CF kids, right? Well, we talked a lot this whole panel yesterday about doing telehealth now because they're getting so healthy. That didn't feel that way 5 years ago. And so when this trial came to us and became an option, Cohen was asking questions this time. Harper's still a little young at this point to ask the big questions, but he goes, well, I want to talk to Dr. Jordana. We're like, okay, all right, great. She literally had a phone call set up with him, and his questions were, what if it doesn't work? And we're thinking, well, shoot, we didn't answer this question for him. And she said, well, buddy, that's the whole point. We're trying to figure out if this is gonna work. And she gets so excited to tell him, okay, this is a once daily dosing. And he looks at her and he's like, I take a lot of pills. I don't care if I take more. And we're like, crap. How do we, everything that she was bringing at him, he was like, all right, but there's gotta be better. So it wasn't until honestly 2 weeks ago when Cohen otherwise would have missed a morning dose of Trikafta, and he came home from school and I'm on him and I'm saying, dude, you missed your morning dose of ALIFTREC, right? We don't have to take it at night. It's once daily dosing, but because of the trial, we're taking it in the morning. And he was like, well, it's not a big deal. I only take it once now. I said, exactly. Do you remember when we had to take it twice a day? I would have lost my ever-loving mind because I'm very type A. We do not miss doses. We do not miss treatments. We will do them in the airport. We will do them in the car. But if you were still on Trikafta and you missed that morning dose, I'm gonna be talking to our doctors, what do we do? Where do we go from here? We've missed a dose. The Kent kids have missed a dose. That doesn't happen. And it was like a light bulb went off and he said, oh yeah, so I guess it is good that we only have to take this once a day. And I'm like, bingo, buddy. Even though to him it doesn't seem like a big deal to shove 20 pills in your mouth at a time, the dosing of this is a big deal to us. And Harper's hearing this conversation because it's easy to hear me in our house. And I know that she's also like, okay, all right, we get this. This is a once-time, one daily dose. So it's important for us to keep the kids at our forefront by letting them know, like, you're in charge of this, but I know you said, what made us, want to go ahead with this? What things were we considering? Well, I'm also considering the 2 other in our family who don't have CF. And they very much, when you are coming up with children who have chronic illnesses as siblings, I can't explain, I know I can to Karen in here somewhere, I cannot explain a triplet bond, but it is something that none of us can, you don't understand, the oldest, the youngest, the middle. Their bond is something significant. And when you pull the youngest away and say, oh, Harper gets to go on a plane, she's gonna go see her doctors. Oh, we get to see Papa and T, who are in the same town at this time. That doesn't look like a hardship. To them, it looks like she gets a cool plane ride, we get to get cool treats. And so what we considered was, first of all, who are we leaving at home with the other 2 children, which are my parents. They moved to Texas with us to help care for them. And we're also having to explain how CF is not like a cool thing to have, even though that's how they view it right now. It means that there's extra attention and that's all they see. So what we considered is, how do we navigate our 2 who are not with CF and our 2 with CF, and how do we keep them all in the same sort of relationship, but also let them know that they're individual and they're gonna have their own little things. So I think that's currently what we're struggling with the most, is the triplet girls, Addison, Elliot, and Harper. Addison is the middle of the 3, and she very much has that middle child role and wants the attention. And I'm like, homegirl, you're just a carrier. Like, I'm sorry. And she's like, well, and then Elliot's like, well, I have nothing. And I'm like, well, in our family, nothing means you're the weirdo, because all of us have, something. So it's very difficult to try to navigate right now the communication between the 3 of the girls and then the 4 of the kids. Cohen is now 11 and in very competitive sports. And we've had to miss a practice. And although he's not the next Messi, he's darn good. And in his mind, that practice could have gotten him to Messi level. So we are we're just trying to navigate how to deal with their emotions on knowing the hardship of traveling, while also reiterating that this is important because we saw it happen with Orkambi, and this is going to happen for other kids as well.
Yeah, you saw the end results.
Yeah.
Awesome. And of course he's going to be messy.
I know. Yeah. In his mind.
Catherine, I want to talk a little bit more about the CF Foundation, the sort of unique components of the CF community with the Therapeutics Development Network. And again, since we're talking about federal funding, how federal funding sort of contributes to that really important body.
Perfect. So for those of you who are not aware, I'm sure everybody in this room is aware though, the CF Foundation supports a Therapeutics Development Network, and this is a network of centers around the country that really have a lot of the specialized CF care associated with care centers, but also provide a location to perform clinical studies or therapeutic research. And so this is overseen by the Therapeutics Development Network Coordinating Center, the TDNCC. We talk in letters. Letters are a lot easier to roll off the tongue, but I feel like I need to say a word before I use the abbreviation. So the TDN and the TDNCC are supported by the CF Foundation, and like I said, facilitate a lot of the industry drug trials, but also help with multi-center clinical studies that investigators may be doing around the country, and allow for you to not just do a study at one center and get a single, finding that may not be able to be translated across other places, but really pulls in resources from other institutions and could see geographic differences in response to a clinical study or drug. So this network has been in existence since I think about 1998. It was really set up to kind of in anticipation of the CFTR modulator trials and some anti-infective trials that were going on at the time, to make sure that we were able to support the advancement of therapies in CF. And with a small population, it was critical to do that. It's really become a bit of a model for a lot of other organizations for how to do this. And we have a great infrastructure, and I think kind of the envy of a lot of places. But it's also really received a lot of respect, even from the NIH. And so there are a number of studies that are run through our TDN that are supported by NIH funds. So an investigator, again, comes in, has that great idea, they want to test a question, they go to the NIH, they review it, they say this looks great, and one of the things that they'll see sometimes and kind of comment on is if it's a clinical study being run through the TDN, it's kind of that extra little check mark of, they know that it's going to be done right, it's going to be done in a timely manner, and so it kind of gives that seal of approval that I think can sometimes help to get those federal funds for that study, and then can be supported by the infrastructure that the foundation is providing through the TDN, the TDNCC, and really makes it so that we don't necessarily have to pick up the full bill. One thing that we have done as well, though, is for some of these studies, the NIH may be looking at a certain population. And I think JP had mentioned about the bionic pancreas is a great example where the NIH was supporting a study looking at the bionic pancreas use in a diabetes population. And we were able to help kind of supplement those studies with CFF funds to be able to say, would this work in CF? Is this a right direction? And so we're able to kind of leverage each other's funding sometimes in order to push the clinical research forward, but the TDN has been just instrumental in being able to help advance not only drug trials, but also just supporting studies. I know there was mention yesterday of the PROMISE study and some of these observational studies. A lot of those are run through the TDN as well. So you just have very high-functioning clinical research teams that are able to help perform these studies. They're absolutely essential for helping to move the field forward.
I mean, that's been something since I walked in the door almost 20 years ago that has been really important for us to share with Capitol Hill around federal funding is how much we partner back and forth, right? That you just talked about, and this has been something that I think the CF Foundation has done really well, is to really kind of collaborate and go back and forth with the NIH to make sure that we're really accelerating that science. But I do want to emphasize again with the topic today how important that federal funding is to us being able to proceed and pursue these really important questions in CF. The bionic pancreas is such a great example.
Yeah, I would say there's the studies where investigators are coming in and may go to the NIH for the funding, but have a conversation with us, and I think that's where some of the bionic pancreas kind of conversation moved forward. But there are also situations where we meet with program staff at the NIH, and we've had ongoing relationships with them over the years in multiple different institutes to understand what they're interested in, where they may have some initiatives coming in that would be really important for CF. I remember having discussions years ago about a certain topic that they were trying to get a special funding announcement for. Their leadership wasn't really that interested. We had a meeting with them and basically said, this is really important. It was, I think, kind of in the adult stem cell population and airway repopulation, regeneration, and showed the enthusiasm from our side. They took that back to their leadership. It got announced the next year. So there are times where we can also work with them, and that again was bigger than CF. It wasn't just for us. It was looking at the broader community, but we can have an influence as well to make sure that things that we think will be important for moving the field forward and we may benefit from, that we have a dialogue with them as well. So.
I do want to talk in the moment of today because we are seeing efforts to cut a lot of this. And I think we need to be granular. It's early days right now. A lot of this is very hot off the presses. A lot of, as you probably saw on Tuesday, a significant number of people, both at the NIH and the FDA, were fired. And we are still bluntly trying to assess who's still left that we work with. I can tell you that from the FDA, several of our, and we'll talk about the FDA in a second, several of our critical partners are gone. And I know, Catherine, one of the things you've shared with me, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about, is some of the delays that we're starting to see. So can you just speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning earlier, a lot of these labs really depend on having that continuous funding or the knowing that their funding is coming. And typically once a grant is reviewed, there's kind of a set timeline of you have a study section, you get your comments and scores back, it goes to council, and then you get your grant. And that's all operated like normal for decades. And what we've seen is in the past few months where that kind of last step in the process, that council meeting, many of those were canceled. And so people who had very good scores, should have their grants funded, should be able to move the science forward, are just waiting. And they have no certainty. Are the grants going to come? Is council going to meet? When is council going to meet? And they may have labs that have people that need, they're paying off of those grants, and they may actually end up running into lapses of funding if things don't continue at the way that they were expecting to. And I would say one of the places that this has been really important for us, and we're definitely monitoring the situation, is we support, from the foundation side, what are called research development programs, and there are kind of our basic science research centers. We have many of them around the country. The NIH has a very similar program that is the CF Translational Research Centers, and they're multi-$100,000 a year programs that are essential for providing core resources that really are research facilities and services that enable an entire institution to advance their CF research even faster. It may be gaining access to a certain type of cell model or having some statistical support, or there's a lot of different things they can do. Many of these have been ongoing for decades, and there's been this continuity. They're 5-year grants, and we had a number of them come up for renewal this past year. So they submitted a grant last summer, it went through review, they got their scores, and now they're waiting. And the challenge with this is, if things tick by too much longer, their original grants will end, and they don't know when it'll be that the next ones will start. And so making sure that there's that continuity is just so important for making sure we just don't stop research midstream for unnecessary reasons. So there's lots of examples of that all over the NIH, but I would say that's one that I'm personally concerned about and keeping an eye on, because these are a lot of our research centers that really make a huge impact in what we do. And like I said, the core services is part of it, pilot projects for people bringing new great minds into CF, funded by these programs, training. So I think there's some really critical pieces that we need to make sure that are supported and the continuity is there.
Another place where I know we're hearing some uncertainty that's leading to actions, the specific action is to not bring on new trainees. Can you talk about the importance of the federal government in funding the next generation of clinical research, of basic research, of clinicians?
Yeah. So again, with graduate training, so typically when a person is going into a PhD program, they'll be admitted into a program, they'll find a lab to do research in, and that mentor that runs the lab that they're going into has to pay for that student. They need to pay for their tuition, their stipend, and also pay for the research. A lot of times that can be put onto an NIH grant, so that may go on to one of their R01s, so it depends on funding in order to pay for those students. That's one way that training happens. And as you can imagine, with the current uncertainty at a lot of institutions, people don't know if they can take on students. They're not wanting to commit to a 4 or 5 year commitment with somebody, not knowing what their grant situations are going to be like. Will they be able to actually see them all the way through to completion? So I think that's one piece of the puzzle that's causing some uncertainty at institutions. Also, I've heard reports of there are a number of institutions that get training grants from the NIH. So these are larger awards. They may train, have a couple of slots or 10 slots for students or fellows, people who are post-MD, post-PhD, to continue their research training as they're kind of launching into their independent career. Many institutions depend on these to be able to support the research and ensure we have that pipeline, and many of those, again, are at risk of being cut with the current budget cuts. So those are the two kind of NIH direct financial support mechanisms that I think are causing some of the concern that we're seeing with institutions, some that are saying we're cutting back on the number of students that we're going to accept this year because we can't commit to the number we normally do, or others just saying we're not accepting any, we need to figure out what's going on. And then weighing into some of the that concern also is just the indirect cost discussion and looking at the overall health of a lot of these academic research centers. And I think some of them are wanting to get a little bit of clarity as to what it's going to look like operating moving forward before they make these long-term commitments. Because again, it's people, it's their livelihood, and it's I think it's a challenging space to be in. But it's going to be really important for ensuring we have a pipeline of researchers and clinicians in the future, that we don't just all of a sudden have a stoppage to all these people that are either just getting started or trying to transition and they can't transition. I think we may not see the impact immediately, but we will feel that impact for years and decades to come if that happens.
Yeah, and that's another place where the foundation is layering on top of that federal funding, right? We have supplemental extra pieces that really leverage that federal funding to train these folks. We talked about it, Whitney talked about it yesterday in the medical panel, how important it is to have that breadth of CF knowledge, how we're going to need to have a lot of other clinicians coming into CF. You're thinking about diabetes, you're thinking about endocrine. Those training programs, our job is to get them also in CF. We add sort of the icing on the cake to the federal funding for training. So that's definitely something that we're concerned about. All right, I'm watching our time. I want to shift to the FDA, and if you don't mind, I'm going to take that one. We've talked a lot about basic science. We've talked a lot about translational science. In translational science, again, Catherine did such a great job of talking about that partnership between the NIH and the FDA and the CF Foundation and all of our trial networks. I do want to spend a little bit of time on the FDA. It is, again, an essential partner to how we have new therapies for people with CF. All the trials that Tara and her family are doing are work done in collaboration with the FDA, and the idea is ultimately to deliver them the information that they need to be able to make the decision of, does this drug work? Is it safe? Is it safe and effective, right? And that is really the gold standard that we always want to make sure we adhere to for people with CF. We want to make sure it works. We know it. I love your tangible example of, but that the doctor said of, well, that's the whole point, buddy, right? And we have a remarkable collaboration with the FDA and have had for years. I loved Mike's chat GPT, and I think that one of the great things I get to hear about in my job is that those sentiments about the CF Foundation being the gold standard coming directly from the federal agency making decisions on whether a CF drug works. They have told us time and time again that we are the gold standard, and one reason that is because of our very deep collaboration and partnership with the agency. One thing that happens, the reason that happens is because the federal agency, the FDA, has the time and space to think critically with us. And right now, what we're doing and have really been focusing on for the last 2, almost 3 years, is helping work with the agency about what new CF looks like. So for decades, we've been able to evaluate cystic fibrosis drugs with the FDA based on certain endpoints. What are we measuring, right? Are we measuring lung function, things like that? That's looking different now for 2 reasons. One, the success of the modulators for a larger CF population. That means that our trial designs look different for things like new antibiotics. And it looks different as we think about cell and gene therapy for people who don't yet benefit from modulators, because the number of people that are going to be able to participate in those trials are significantly smaller than they have been in years past. We are really, in many ways, whether it's a new antibiotic or a cell and gene therapy for cystic fibrosis, rewriting the playbook with the FDA of how to effectively design a clinical trial for cystic fibrosis. And we need them at the table with us. And as I said, they've been stalwart partners, willing to roll up their sleeves, willing to listen to us as the experts in CF, as they are the experts in reviewing and improving therapies. This has been a years-long effort, and what we rely on is the highest scientific standards that we're bringing and that they're bringing, and deep expertise on both sides of the aisle there, both bodies coming in and bringing their knowledge and their know-how and their expertise to the table. What happened on Tuesday, I do want to emphasize again, the loss of experts that we have been working with for years and in some cases decades will set us back. It's not an understatement. We are going to have to start again in some of these conversations to be able to effectively design the next generation of CF therapeutics development. We're going to do it, but I do want to emphasize that because it is real for people with CF. It is real for our efforts. And it risks delays, additional time, and additional cost. So I wanted to make sure that we really understood that as we sit here and try to understand what's happening and where we go from here. The exodus of clinical expertise is going to be challenging. So I want to take the last few minutes to give you a charge. I hope that we've been able to unpack what's going on today, what's real, and how it impacts our efforts, our collective efforts to drive new therapies for cystic fibrosis and improve care. And I hope we've left you with the understanding of just how integral these federal partners are to us and how important federal funding is. So as you just heard, science matters, and we need to fund it. And I do want to say that your voice here is really important. What we can do here, in addition to the partnerships that Catherine leads, that we're doing with the FDA, that all of our scientists are doing across these agencies, is telling this story to decision makers, to the people who are making the funding decisions that are in the news right now. Your advocacy for these institutions is vital. And we're already hearing some good questions from Capitol Hill about, are we making good decisions with some of these cuts and some of these efforts? We want to be a partner there, and we want to be able, and I think no one's better positioned than the CF community, to share what is possible with effective funding and collaborations with public and private sector, and also what's at risk. So I want you to really take what you heard today and let it fuel you to drive to make inroads and conversations with your elected officials. These are decisions that are happening right now. These are conversations that are in the news today. Just yesterday, Dave Elan and our government affairs team was having conversations while at this meeting with the United States Senate, who had questions about the impact of Tuesday's firings on CF. We need your voices. They call us because you call them. They want to know what we think because you tell them that you need them to pay attention to CF. And so I want you to be inspired by what you're doing this weekend here in San Antonio. I want you to carry that forward, to have conversations with the people making these decisions. Please sign up for advocacy if you have not already. Please sign up on the screen with your text to get our alerts. But also take the extra step to make relationships and to send your own messages. It's very easy with the tools on our website through the advocacy portal. It's all pre-populated in there. You didn't need to take notes today. It's all in there, but your voice matters. Your voice saying science is important to me and my family and what we need to do moving forward, and I need your help, and I'm here to help you understand why this matters to me, is critical, because we are seeing questions emerge about some of the decisions that have happened, saying, is this really where we're going to go? And is this making sure that America stays as the global leader in science, in CF? So please join us in taking action to contact your members of Congress, contact your United States senators, and say this matters to you. And I hate to tell you, but you don't get to do it just once. Right now, we need to be loud, and we need to be constant. We need to be having these conversations again and again. So I really implore you to take action, to call routinely, to build those relationships, and to make sure that they see you and your family and the CF person in your life who matters, because it does make a difference. We are getting calls from Capitol Hill asking us, tell us more. What does this mean for the CF community? And we need your voice to do it. I want to give the last word to Tara, because you're living this. And sort of what is this conversation left you feeling, and what do you want to tell the audience and ask them to help us with?
Well, I think it's most important for especially the family members. In our family, we say it's a family disease. It's not just Cohen and Harper. Every single one of us has been affected, whether it is the other two, Elliot and Addison, who have to sit on the couch while their brother and sister do treatments because we do it as a family, whether it's the grandparents who are missing, traveling to other grandkids' events because they need to stay behind so we can travel for clinical trial. It is our story that they're going to listen to. And I challenge you to share your story. Your story is within you. It's nothing you have to make up. It's nothing that you have to solidify. I have no cards. I'm winging this because it's passionate. I'm passionate. And I challenge those who are making the decisions about funding to look at my babies, Cohen and Harper, and how can you put a dollar bill on them? And so share your story. Tell them that it's not just funds, that these are people and these are lives, and they matter to us.
Thank you.